Hello and welcome, everybody. I'm Dr. David Litwa, and I'm here with a friend and colleague, Dr. Jeffrey J. Kripal, who is professor at Rice University and has been there for many, many years and has been a personal inspiration to me as I've developed as an academic. In fact, I wish I learned of Jeff's writings earlier. You know, when I was in graduate school, I read a lot of J.Z. Smith and Durkheim and, the classics. And boy, if I had read Jeff, when I was 25, I think I would have more quickly gotten to where I needed to be. But at any rate, now, we're letting the world know about Jeff and his great books. And Jeff, thank you so much for talking with me. I hope you're well.
I'm well. Thanks for having me, David. I'm genuinely pleased to be here.
Absolutely. Well, I really appreciate you sharing your time. So I was talking to Jeff about, how we would run this conversation. And Jeff has been on many, many, many podcasts and interviews, and he has shocked the world and given us so much food for thought. And I had to confess to Jeff that I am really interested in the kind of not the dimension that, the esoteric exists and that we need to talk about it. For me, that's just like the presupposition of everything. And we need to do humanities in a new way and rewrite the books and rewrite the textbooks. I take that all as completely given, done and dusted. What I want to talk about with Jeff is more the theory side. So, and the sort of the politics that develop out of that. So the theory of, okay, so we're in the humanities, and it's the original sin to talk about ontology and metaphysics, but we're going to do it anyway. And so how do we do it? And how do we do it perhaps by escaping that fundamental criticism that we are ourselves religious insiders of a sort, and so that we're only masquerading as historians when in fact we're just a new kind of religious insider who wants to do ontology, right? So how do we wade those waters, Jeff? Do you have thoughts on that?
Well, I have a lot of thoughts on that. I mean, that's really the work, or that's really the books today. I mean, maybe the place to begin is that what historians and philosophers and scholars of religion do is totally ignored by the public culture, certainly in the States. I can't speak for outside the States, but I suspect elsewhere too. And I think that's our fault. I think that renunciation of ontology or the question of what is real is, of course, what drives religion in the first place. And to the extent we don't talk about it or can't talk about it, we're not talking about religion. We're talking about something else. We're talking about history or literature or politics or sociology or some kind of external third-person view, which I don't think is particularly interesting to at least what I want to do, or at least what I think a lot of people want to do, which is ask that ontological question. There are a lot of resources in the history of the study of religion that do ask that ontological question, that do break out of that straitjacket. And I don't understand for the life of me why we don't quote those people more, go there where they go. And the original sin you were speaking of, I mean, it's really not the original sin, right? It's a modern, very modern belief system that we don't ask those questions. And I think it's arbitrary. And I think people know better. I think when you really poke people or ask people, after a beer or something, they start to talk immediately about these very things. even if they won't write about them in their scholarship or speak about them as a public intellectual, which I think is a mistake. I think it's part of the problem we're in right now, is that we've helped create this world where you can't talk about those fundamental questions.
So what's our strategy then? So if we talk about, and we use the fancy term dual aspect monism, if we just get right into the weeds here. So we posit an ultimate reality. So it's neither mental, it's neither material, it's something with a capital S. And if we get any more detailed, then we start making claims maybe that as the students of religion we don't wish to make. So what's the strategy that we take? Because it's not like we're Plotinus. Like, I mean, in a sense, we can learn from Plotinus and his seminar and say, oh, okay, well, here's what we believe in. We believe in this being called the One. And the One, is the center and source of all reality. And it's what we really are. And it's what we all came from. And it's where we're all going. And that's what we believe. And that's what explains everything. So that's Plotinus talking. How are we different than that? Or should we be doing that? Or
yeah, we should be doing that.
Okay.
And I don't think it's a matter of belief. I think people have these experiences. I think this is an experiential, I don't want to say empirical because that sounds too sciencey, but this is based on experiences that human beings have all the time. And so to speak of Plotinus for a minute, I mean, Neoplatonism and that sort of Platonic or Plotinian system is one way of framing these experiences, thinking out of these experiences. I think Plotinus had these mystical experiences of the One, and he created or rationally created a philosophy out of them. My monism, first of all, it's a tentative metaphysics. People ask me what I think, and I said, okay, this is what I think. And I share with them dual aspect monism, but I don't think that's necessarily where people land or what the truth is. Maybe the world is some other ontological option, but I think the materialism and the historicism and the localism that we assume to be true is in fact an ideology. It's a belief system, and we don't recognize it as, we just think, oh, that's not having a belief. No, that's having a belief. You believe that. So let's admit that those are your beliefs, that you actually cannot prove that. That's an interpretation of reality, and it also determines what you look at. I guess this is the deeper point. Once you confess or admit or are reflexive about a worldview or an ontology, you can see how it determines what you look at and what you talk about. And I think we talk about the wrong things, or we talk about things that are certainly true and important, but we don't talk about the things that are really important to people. The experiences of oneness or unity or mystical experience. We also don't talk about these paranormal experiences that are just fundamentally strange and weird, and that's a different issue of the mystical unity, but I think it's related here. I think we shy away from anything that can't be put in this materialist box.
So Jeff, the Krypalian, if I can coin a word here, the Krypalian metaphysics is you're stating something which could be tagged as a belief, but you're not. What makes you different from a religious insider is you're not holding so tightly.
No, I'm not.
It has no creedal sense.
I'm not.
It has no creedal meaning.
Yeah.
It's just a placeholder.
Yeah.
That's your metaphysics.
So dual aspect monism, my own ontology may be wrong, David, but the criteria for me is, well, what keeps more stuff on the table?
Mm-hmm.
And dual aspect monism actually keeps it all on the table, all the stuff I want to talk about and look at. Whereas this materialist historicism that we referred to, it takes things off the table constantly. And these are the very things I want to talk about. So why are you taking them off the table? Well, to preserve your particular worldview. I understand why you're doing it, but certainly the people, the human beings that I talk to and know and have learned from, these are the most important experiences of their lives. This is not tangential, some side interest of who they are. This is the core of everything for them. So why are we taking precisely that off the table so that we can do history or do literature or do scholarship in a particular way? I just think that's morally wrong, David. I think it's morally misguided, and it leads us down philosophical pathways that are disastrous.
Oh yeah, agreed. And I think it's in the Superhumanities. Your book, The Superhumanities. You come out against agnosticism.
Yeah, I do.
I just want to be able to distinguish your view from agnosticism, because what you're saying is that you're making some kind of assertion of metaphysics, of ontology, but you're not doing it obviously in a belligerent or a creedal sense. But someone could then say, well, Jeff, aren't you being agnostic about your metaphysics? I mean, you're saying that, okay, there is an ultimate reality, but then you're not willing to say anything else, anything very detailed. And that's in a way that kind of keeps everything kind of safe. That isn't that kind of agnostic, or sense of agnostic?
Well, first of all, so the reason I don't like the word or the reason I'm against agnosticism philosophically is I think it returns us to materialism. I think it's a cop-out. And it's not that people who are agnostic in a mystical or metaphysical sense, that's not agnosticism to me. That's something else. That's, to me, more interesting and more honest, and I'm perfectly happy with that. And I'm perfectly willing to say something about the real world and about truth with a capital T. Now, I might be wrong, David, and that's where I don't have the religious believers' exclusivism. I'm really sincere about that. I really don't think I have a monopoly on that. I know I don't. But I know that certain ontological positions keep things on the table and allow us to talk about them, and this conversation then can go into the future. And I know that other ontological options take things off the table and shut down the conversation and do not allow us to move that into the future. And so my criteria again for a methodological or theoretical option is what keeps stuff on the table. And by stuff, I mean people's experiences. That's really what I have in mind. I don't mean political systems or values or ritual systems. I mean near-death experiences. I mean precognitive dreams. I mean out-of-body experiences. I mean things that actually happen to people, to human beings, all the time, and we refuse to talk about it, or they won't talk about them because they understand that there's a heavy social censor in place. And
okay, go ahead.
Yeah. So first of all, I don't like the expression religious studies either. I think it implies, I am very sensitive to words and how human beings perceive words. Religious studies to me means that we're religious, and that the study of religion is about making people more religious. And being religious has been pretty awful to people. It's been a horror show. And I don't want any part of that. But when people say to me, and I know you don't mean this at all, but when they imply that taking on ontological option is not religious studies, I'm just like, says who? Who gets to decide what the study of religion is? We do. That's what we're doing. J.Z. Smith made a decision for his generation, and Max Weber made a decision for his generation, and so on and so forth. Fine, that's great. They had their own reasons for doing that. We learned a great deal from them. But we in this generation and in the future generations, we can define the field in a very different way. And I think we have to, if we want to be heard and if we want to be faithful to these questions about reality and what's this all about? What are we doing here? Why are we studying religion, David? Why are you doing this? This is a really odd pursuit, but it makes a lot of sense if you have these convictions or questions in mind.
Right. Yeah, no, just to clarify for our audience, I am a dyed-in-the-wool Krypalian, and so if I sound like I'm playing a little bit of the devil's advocate, don't mind me. I'm actually just really curious. So you make an ontological claim, like there is a source that's non-material,
right?
So good ontological claim. It's not too detailed, probably a fair broad amount of people, religious people might be able to agree with that, let's say. And here we get to the kind of political side of this. Let's say we want to characterize that belief as ontological. What you seem to be saying is that we don't necessarily need to characterize that belief as religious. We can just kind of make a philosophical stance and say,
yeah. So our ancestors, by which I mean whatever your ancestry is, certainly did frame it and understood it religiously. And they created these ritual systems and these belief systems and these religions, as we now know, out of what I suspect were their own experiences and memories. And so it's not that I'm suggesting something that's neutered or domesticated and that we remove that edge. I like that edge. I think that's very faithful to our histories and to the present as well. So I'm not, I guess I'm resisting a bit the idea of philosophical, unless we see philosophy as a way of life and we think of it in an ancient Greek sense and not in a modern English analytic sense. I just want to vomit. It's just like that is not what it's about. Sorry,
sure.
sorry. That might get you some kind of precision and some kind of tenure or job or whatever, but it's not what reality is doing or what it is, and it's not what human beings are about either, in any kind of way. But religion is what human beings are about. So I actually am very comfortable with the religions, but the problem with them. So let me back up. The problem is that academic study is completely horizontal. And we can talk about politics and histories and literatures till the cows come home. And that's all true. That's all good and just and essentially true. But what we've lost is this vertical dimension. We will not allow on our table any experience of transcendence or otherness or unity or their oneness, because we think it violates this horizontal picture. And of course it doesn't. It's just two very different ways of looking or of defining what is real, but they're not opposed. And so what I mean by the superhumanities, it means the humanities. It means a fierce focus on class, gender, sexuality, race, and ecology. It means all of these things that humanists mean. All of that is true, but it also means let's keep on the table these superhuman states. And particularly when we're talking about religion or the history of religions, we have to focus in on those superhuman states, because that's what created the religions. That's what created the revelations in the first place, were those superhuman states. So why are we not talking about that? And why are we reducing it to this horizontal view of things, which again is correct, but not sufficient? So that's what I mean, David. And the religions, my problem with the religions is they want to exclude. They want to take off the table people's experiences that don't fit into their particular religious worldview. And I'm just like, oh, don't do that. That's just
right.
That's just wrong. And so what I call this comparative impulse pushes against that religious exclusivism and wants to put all of these human experiences on the table that often result in very different worldviews.
Right. Okay. Well, let me approach this from another direction, because as you know, I study a particular subfield, which some people call Gnosticism, some people don't want to call Gnosticism, but it's been called in the past Gnostic Religion, right? And so Gnostic religion, and for me, what makes Gnostic religion is not the exclusivism. It's the inclusivism, right? It's this radically syncretic, to use another, charged word, but it's this radically syncretic or cosmopolitan kind of religion, which just says, is that your truth? That's mine too. I'll take everything. It's a bit Hindu in that respect, or it uses an interpretive hermeneutical matrix to say, yeah, I'll take everything, and I will run it through my own matrix.
Right.
And I will embrace all truths. That's the Gnostic religion.
Yeah.
And you wrote a book called The Serpent's Gift, in which you talked about your own kind of gnosis. So, I mean, would you be comfortable with saying that, in a sense, you could be doing religion, but in a Gnostic way?
Oh,
or
yeah.
You still want to resist that?
Oh yeah.
Oh, okay.
I think that's what particular kinds of intellectuals have been doing for a long time, and I think ancient Gnosticism is essentially the first criticism of religion as well. So it's very, and I say this in the superhumanities, once you affirm this verticality and you lift off of the historical plane, then you can take whatever works. Syncretism is not a bad word. There is no appropriation. There's no such thing, because mind or gnosis can draw on anything, and it will draw on anything. It's only when you restrict yourself to that horizontal plane and you affirm these individual identities or these cultural essences that you have this problem of appropriation and syncretism. But once you acknowledge this transcendent knowledge or this direct immediate gnosis, then again, it's not a problem. But that's what we don't do, David. And what I'm trying to do, you referred to yourself as a Krypalian. The truth is that this has been in the field for centuries, if not millennia. And what I'm trying to do is really channel that and say, hey, look, there's this other current that's really powerful, and here's why. And I'm trying to give it a new voice and speak to the issues of today in it.
Right. And what I'm wanting to do is, in a sense, overcome some of the objections which could be thrown at you. So hearing
there are a lot of objections thrown at me.
One objection that I think could be thrown at you is, if I may have the wrong premises here, so feel free to correct. But so if you stand up at a TED Talk or whatever, or a classroom and say, okay, we don't know what reality is, but we know that it's not matter. and it's something different than matter. It's probably something different than mind as well, and it's one, and we all came from it, and we're all going to it. And then someone stands up and says, well, Dr. Kripal, how is that not against the humanities? Because the humanities is all about difference. And what you're saying is we're all the same. So you're taking the motivation for studying difference away from us, because now we can't talk about class, race, or gender because those don't really exist. Those can only exist based on the material world. But what you're saying is that's not real. So how do we engage with that?
Yeah. So I'm not saying that, by the way. It's a both and, David. That's the language I use. I'm affirming the emphasis on class, sex, gender, race, and ecology. I mean, I'm affirming it. I think it is very not just possible, but very powerful to do those things. But why then do we take off the table the superhuman states or altered states? I just say, let's do it all. Let's make the humanities the superhumanities, but that doesn't mean it's not the humanities. Again, this was my point earlier. It's no, we need to do all of that because we are that horizontal, material, embodied identity or being. We are definitely, maybe that's most of us in our day-to-day experience, but people also have this experience where they're not that and where they go beyond that. And I'm saying, let's listen to that too, because that's human too. That's part of who we are. And that's precisely what we've taken off the table. So it's both and, not either or, is what I'm trying to say.
Okay. That's a helpful clarification. Okay.
I mean, what people don't realize, I think, sometimes they think I just talk about weird stuff and that I believe everything. And that's what they think. The truth is that the first 15 or 20 years of my career was in sexuality studies and gender theory, and that I was completely rejected and censored and kicked out of really an entire country for that early work. I was and remain an activist along sexual orientation and gender lines. That is in my bones, as it were, in my DNA, and I want to affirm that, as well as these altered states or this weird stuff. It's not one or the other. It's both for me.
Right. Okay. And just a very quick biographical question there then. So if your first book, which is Khalis Child, right? If that didn't have such a violent reaction from the Hindu fundamentalists, do you think you turn to the UFO stuff, or do you think you would?
No, okay. I don't. I still think I would be probably a happy scholar of India and Hindu thought. I think that, and that experience also radicalized me as an intellectual, David. I really know that thinking about religion comes with heavy moral and political costs, and I paid those, and I think our history shows that. Our histories show that, dramatically. I think the study of religion was born in the prisons and people getting killed for having these thoughts, and I think we dismiss that at our own peril, or we forget that at our own peril.
Okay. So a question about you as a pedagogue, maybe as a mystagogue. Whenever I read your books, I'm not sure what other people feel, but you're just such a master storyteller. I get very, very excited and involved in the books. I mean, you have such a, whether or not it's true, and I think it is true, but it is so hopeful and exhilarating. I mean, wow, to believe that we could be deified. I mean, that's just cool.
We can be. I mean, that's
we can. I just wonder. So you don't write as a traditional academic. A lot of your works is a kind of detailed storytelling, or you take on the persona of a particular academic thinker, like a William James or a Nietzsche, or and I just wonder, is this a kind of intentional pedagogy where you are using the books? I think the way that you phrased it in The Serpent's Gift is that you don't want to hit them so much at the level of logos. You want to actually create the ontological shock, but in the reading experience, like finding a snake hissing on the ground, like, and then just being that's the kind of reaction you're generating. Am I getting that correct? I mean, would you generalize that for the majority of your works? Or
yeah, so I can say a couple things about that. Well, I can say a lot about that. First of all, that's true. I think there's something mysterious, and I don't use the word lightly. There's something transformative or weird about writing and reading. And I think we have banalized it or domesticated it. I don't know how the right pronunciation is.
Sure.
We've turned it into something boring and mechanical, and it's not. Reading is a transformative mutation that I think we've underestimated. Part of that, comes from my Benedictine or Christian background with Lectio Divina, but part of it also comes from being trained by Wendy Doniger, who very much told stories like this, or tells stories like this. And the way I describe the thinking is you don't land, but you orbit. You orbit this planet, and you take all of these different stories, and you kind of get a feel for the entire planet, but you don't actually work from syllogism to syllogism and work in some kind of linear way. And I think that's faithful. I think that's very faithful and very, very powerful to how a lot of creative thinking has actually happened in the history of human thought and culture. I don't think it's all through logos. I think it's also through mythos, through story,
and pathos as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Pathos is what I've written a lot about, what I call the traumatic secret. And when people ask me what all of these weird experiences have in common, my initial response is always trauma. It's always something's going wrong here. Something is breaking. Something's erupting. Something's coming in that normally doesn't get in. And that pathos. I mean, the word telepathy, for example, means pathos at a distance. It means suffering or deep suffering or love at a distance. And again, I think we underestimate that emotional sensibility, which is very physical, but which is also not physical. I mean, what is emotion? It's this weird, both and of the body and the mind that I think is very significant to these events. The other thing I'll say about writing and reading is, when I looked at paranormal experiences and when I listened to people talk about them, first of all, they were always stories. And it was shocking to me how often there was some kind of language or some kind of communication. Somebody heard something in their mind, or somebody dreamt something in the terms of a story. It was the phenomena itself, is what I'm trying to say, is itself a text. And so when you embody the phenomena in a text, I think you're replicating what the phenomena intends. I think there's a kind of recursivity or reflexivity there that can take place and move one out of a particular narrative or story that one's caught in.
Okay. So in terms of academic method and pedagogy, so it seems to me, and I may be sensationalizing this, but So
You're probably not, by the way.
you don't need to have an esoteric or mystical experience in order to study esoteric and mystical experiences, but in a sense, your books are, and maybe other things are ways to generate something like that experience, or at least you crack open the worldview. At least you go that far, where like a chink of light can like burst into the normal, cerebral cortex or whatever. So is this critical mystagogy, or how do you describe your pedagogy? It's very different than
Yeah.
most others.
Yeah. I mean, I think a lot about pedagogy or teaching, but I think about it a lot in terms of the books too. And I get asked this question a lot, and usually the way it's framed is, well, have you had any impossible experiences or paranormal experiences? And my response is always, yes, actually I have. But I'm not a mage. I'm not a paranormal, I'm not gifted that way. I know people who are, but I'm not. I'm fairly ordinary. However, these experiences cracked me open and made me deeply sympathetic, and I think hermeneutically or interpretively oriented towards other experiencers in a way that I think is significant. So I don't deny that there's an experiential or autobiographical root to my interest, but I also don't think I don't think it should be overblown, if that makes sense. Because let me put it this way: this is going to sound geeky, but I'm really happy that other people have these experiences, David. I think that these experiences are distributed throughout the species, and I honestly don't care if I don't have them. Having them, I have them, means that I think I'm somehow special, or that even I exist as a person. I don't think that. I identify with the entire human species, and I think the fact that they have and report these experiences over and over again gives me a lot of joy, and optimism, but also suffering, because people are also suffering when they have these experiences. And I think this is the moral impulse that sometimes isn't obvious. People ask me, well, what's the moral impulse of your work? And I always want to say, it's people. It's people's experiences that I want to affirm and that I want to think with, because they themselves often don't think out of their own experiences. They can't. They're not trained to think out of them. They're not trained. They don't know how to write a book. That doesn't mean that the book is, or the thought is, the only way to do this or to express it. But it is one way to make it public, and it just happens to be the way I know something about.
Mm. Okay. So, I mean, it seems like your battle though is fairly uphill. You're trying to change the humanities into the superhumanities,
Right.
and I just wonder, like, and you mentioned that when you have a beer with your fellow academics in Europe or wherever, they do talk about these esoteric experiences, but there must be, I mean, the stagnancy of humanities in the States. There must be people who really are materialists.
Yeah, there are.
They really do think that we are just neatly arranged carbon.
Yeah.
So would you recommend something like taking psychedelics for people to, and I use this term, because this is not the best term, but to artificially, it's not really artificial, but to maybe artificially open up and cause an ontological shock, because apparently they need it. I'm being a little bit facetious here, but I mean, I'm just trying to gauge, like, how in an auditorium full of materialists, I mean, what else can you say to these people?
Well, okay. A couple things I can respond to that. First of all, these are good people too. And the reason that they're materialists is because that's what their experience of the world is. That I think that's the extent of their experience. However, and this is a big however, I do think that most intellectuals, particularly in the study of religion, if you just scratch the surface, these things come out. And that most people are actually in the closet on this one. They're not, people ask me all the time, well, how do you deal with all the pushback? And you asked about the uphill. I'm like, well, what pushback are you talking about? I don't see it, and I know it's there. I do see it, of course. I've experienced it, but it's not the pushback or the uphill nature of it is not so bad. And I think the warmth and the enthusiasm, which is often secret or hidden, is actually much more extensive than we imagine.
Mm-hmm.
Because people are people, David, and it turns out that even some stodgy scholars of religion, they're also human beings who, they see their grandmother when she passes, or they have some extraordinary experience that they can't explain, and they just push it aside, for the sake of whatever worldview or whatever piece of scholarship, but they know darn well it happens,
Mm-hmm.
So I also just love intellectuals. I think they're great, and I particularly a lot of younger intellectuals. They want tenure and they want a job and they want to exist in the world, and I get that. But they also know these things. They know what we're saying here is true, but they don't actually know how to say both. And that's why I wrote the Superhumanities. Is okay. Here's how you do both. You don't do one or the other. You don't do critical theory or altered states. You do critical theory and altered states. You do them together. You do them both. So that's really the argument. Let me put it in the form of a story. I was once at a university in the East, Southeast, actually, in this case of the U.S. And I heard this through another colleague. The colleague told me about another academic who said, that guy can make UFOs sound Ivy League. And I was like, okay, that's it. That's what you want to do, because the reason people don't speak about this isn't because they don't think it happens. They don't want to sound like the tabloids.
Right.
They don't want to be embarrassed. They don't want to lose their prestige. So I come in and I say, okay, well, here's how you can talk about it, and in the terms that you were trained in, and let's talk about it. Let's do that. And people are like, oh, you can. So that to me is the point I want to make. It's not the pushback or the stodgy materialist. It's the stodgy materialist has a heart too, and a reason for doing this. But we have to get through these reasons in a reasoned way. We have to think our way through this. We can't go around it. We can't say it doesn't happen or doesn't exist. The pushback now. We have to think through the pushback and get to the other side.
Right. Yeah. I suppose I mean pushback more in the sense of just the sheer stagnation. Like their humanities departments are not moving in the direction that you're moving, which gets to the next kind of set of questions about how you're different. I don't want to portray a kind of depressing situation, but I think, yes, the reality is Rice or the program that you've helped to create is very, very unique. A lot of people who want to study the stuff that you study, Jeff, don't have a place in the institute.
No, that's true. That's absolutely true.
And so that's traumatic for lots and lots of people. There's just not enough places at the table. I often, I don't consider myself outside scholarship, but I'm outside the institution now. And I often get questions from people who are like, well, where do I go study this stuff? Because obviously you can't go down to the seminary down the road. And even if by chance you had a secular department of religion, that's probably not going to help either. And, there's just these standard sets of courses, and humanities departments all feel like they're under the gun in terms of funding. And so they don't feel like they don't have a reason for being. So I guess the larger question here is how have you cultivated, and just real quickly, I have recommended Rice's program to countless people because I just think that you're doing something very unique, and I want people to know about it. That's the background.
Well,
So how are you doing things? How are you doing things differently? I guess is the question. I guess I could be more specific than that. But if someone wants to go get a PhD in, I'm not sure what you call it, but just religion, and they're like, okay, well, if I go to University of Washington, I'll get something. If I go to Harvard, I'll get something. If I go to U Chicago, I'll get something. But if I go to Rice, what are they getting that's different?
Well, it is different. But I would say there are really strong currents of this at Harvard, by the way, now, and at the University of Chicago. I mean, those are two institutions where I think this kind of impossible thinking has taken root and is impacting the way people are trained. The challenge, David, that you speak to is the job market. And it's because our worry and concern is there aren't enough jobs in the world for the people who want to do this thing. And there aren't. They're not. But that, to back up a bit, that's our fault again. I think that's the fault of the academy. I think it's argued itself into a depressing state, which then reflects back on it in terms of funding and public support, and then it throws, it claims it's being attacked, as it were, and it is, but it's being attacked because it's created a state of depression and horizontal boredom that is really at the root of this problem or this phenomenon. One of the things I often say is, if you want to make fundamentalism stronger, just keep pushing materialism. Because those are two sides of the same exact cultural phenomenon, and one is a response or reaction to the other. And of course I understand the materialist response of I get that, but why materialism? Why this particular belief system that just doesn't make a lot of sense of what we want to talk about?
Mm-hmm. Well, to speak a bit autobiographically, and I think, being in Texas, this probably happens over and over again, but I was trained in a particular subfield of New Testament studies, and it bothered me that you had this phenomenon where you had people who were clearly theologians.
Yeah.
That is, they were wanting to make particularly Christian ontological claims,
right.
But they were masquerading as historians. I know that's not a nice way to put it, but that's just what it is. They were wanting to reinforce their own insider worldview, but they wanted to do that through looking objective or neutral. And so they would use the tools and methods of religious studies or the study of religion just enough to kind of look objective. But really, when you penetrated below the surface, and they write very big books, and they still do, but it's really about kind of like shoring up the identity, right? And so this pattern, especially in America, it becomes very, very annoying when you see this going on constantly. Yeah. And it's part of the reason is because, just the pragmatic reason that a lot of the jobs available in New Testament studies are from seminaries or from divinity schools. So of course they would ultimately be wanting to shore up their own religious identity.
Right.
But I guess what has motivated a lot of my questions for you is I completely support being vertical It's just that I personally would have no problem with saying I do religious studies religiously, and by religiously I mean Gnostically.
Right.
I want the vertical, and I'm
Right.
just gonna be upfront with you that I do have a historian's hat,
Yeah.
but ultimately I care. I have matters of ultimate concern, right? And I'm doing this, and and if you want to call that religion, fine, call that religion. I am a religious person studying religion. That's
Yeah.
okay with me personally, but
Yeah.
I know you may have a different take on it. I
No,
hope
I don't. I actually don't have a different take. I think that's the answer. I think what you're doing is fantastic, and I think who you are is where we need to go. And your critique of scholars who are using scholarship to push a particular theological agenda, that itself is part of the conversation. That's part of the critique of the field that I think we need to hear. And I think we also want to hear, well, what's the critique of this Gnostic approach to the study of religion? I mean, that that too is part of the conversation, David. And I don't want to shy away from that, but I inhabit exactly the positions that you're articulating, and but I think a lot of people have inhabited that, and I think that again, that's very much a part of the history of the humanities as a whole. And I just want to draw that out and say, look, here it is. This is who we. This is what the discipline is in one set of currents.
Mm-hmm.
And the deeper issue again is the present, where the humanities are being dismissed across the board. I mean, I'm very aware of that. I worked for 4 years in a dean's office, and I saw that happen nationally. You know, Now I have to say, and this will get a little. This will sound like an advertisement, I guess. Rice really is different. Um, I spent my early career on the East Coast of the U.S. and interviewed at a lot of Eastern Coast schools, and they all wanted to tell me what the second book was about. They all knew what scholarship was or what I should do. And when I came to Rice in '02, they didn't do that. Quite the contrary. The institution basically said, in so many words, no, Jeff, you're going to do whatever you do, and we're going to follow it. We're going to support you. I didn't believe them, David. I mean, I really, whenever I heard that, I thought, oh, that's bullshit. Because I had been heard the exact opposite and been told the exact opposite for over a decade on the East Coast. But after being here 24 years now, I think that's genuine. So there's something about higher education at Rice, and I think further west as well, that does open up into this space in a really dramatic way. But I do get that feeling. I do get that same sensibility among other intellectuals, even at East Coast schools. So I don't want to say it's just Rice. It's not. It's embodied in intellectuals around, or certainly around this country, but also in Europe as well. I've seen it in Europe as too. So I am hopeful, because I'm ultimately hopeful in human beings and in people and in intellectuals. And I think what you and I have been talking about, this sort of evil creator, to use the title of your book, it's an illusion. All intellectuals have to do is stand up and start talking like this, and the field will change immediately. But they don't do that. And so my role is to poke the bear, as it were, and say, do that. Stand up. For God's sake, you've got tenure. What are you worried about? So what? Just say what you think, because we need to hear that. And I think the same thing of scientists and physicists and chemists and artists, and they all should be saying that. You know,
Well,
But
yeah.
there are limits. There are really strong sociological or political limits on what can be said and what can't be said. And that's what I want to be sensitive to, but I also want to poke the bear.
Yeah, and I think rightly so, for certain people. I mean, I think in my personal story, I've learned that you can say certain things, but then the institution will kindly ask you to leave, or maybe not so kindly.
Right.
So I am thrilled that, you know, it's not that institutions are bad, and you know, people ask me about my belief in the evil creator. I completely agree with you. I am not bothered by him. I don't lose any sleep at night about the evil creator. Even though I have experienced the institutional forces of injustice. And I just want to highlight Rice because, you know, again, I recommend the program, and I want you to be able to, it's not boasting at all. I want you to be able to say that, you know, here's where you can get some water. Here's an oasis.
Yeah.
Maybe that's too strong a metaphor, but here's a place where, you know,
It's not too strong at all. I mean, what I say is, what we're looking for is the X factor. We're looking for the really strange and the really weird, but we're also looking for the person who has that really weird or really strange, but wants to channel that or rationalize that into some kind of academic pursuit. Again, it's the both and. It's not one, but to me, there's no doctoral pursuit without that X factor.
Well, I think that's super, and I'm sorry to use that as a pun now, but anyway,
But
we are.
I mean, say hyper. I mean,
Hyper.
use the ancient Greek, right? I mean, everything's. I mean, it's a hyper language, which is a mystical language. You know, I mean, that's what we don't recognize.
Well, I think, yeah, and that's what I really treasure about your work and interacting with you, Jeff. And I you know, I will say to everyone here, it is the top of the hour. I will have to let Jeff go here, but I think that if you're looking for someone, yeah, who's going to take you to the seventh heaven while at the same time being down to earth in a good Nebraska sense, you know, like Jeff is your man. Like, I mean, we really have something quite unique here in your scholarship. And I think, you know, it's a gift of the universe that you've been able to do what, you know, what the universe or what the vertical dimension is asking you to do for us. And we appreciate that. And, you know, we will hopefully get some bread crumbs that fall from the table, you know, like, but I think, you know, in the larger metaphor, like we are being actually fed a huge meal by what you're accomplishing. So, and I just wanted to give you an opportunity. I know we didn't talk at all about Archives of the Impossible, but if there's anything that you want to promote or you just want to mention, just to say, you know, here's something, check this out. It could be your website or whatever. Jeff's website is like an intellectual biography. I mean, it's really well done, and it just kind of goes through and explains your intellectual trajectory, and it's really, really helpful. But anyway, I'll let you have the final word.
I mean, David, that's the best place. It's jeffreyjkripal.com, by the way. If you go to the Rice one's boring. It's okay, but it's really the jeffreyjkripal.com one where this is set out. You know, again, this might sound a little, I don't mean this in a dutiful way, but the meal I'm serving is really you. It's the people are the meal. The people are the experiences. And what I'm trying to do is vocalize and intellectualize and authorize those experiences as the key to future knowledge. That's really, at the end of the day, what I see myself as doing. But the authority for it, or the authorizing, does not lie in me. It lies in you. It lies in the people who have these experiences and these forms of gnosis. And I mean that. That's not me just talking. And that's really true. I mean, I think that's really the case.
Well, I'm grateful, and I know many people are, for being able to have this experience speaking with someone who takes experience so seriously. And again, I'll be recommending two of your latest books, at least, if not more, which are How to Think Impossibly and The Superhumanities. So everyone here, go read that material. I guess the flip would be nice if you're kind of like wanting a popular engagement.
A little book too.
Yeah, just a little taste of Jeff, something that every scientist should read. Just a little book, you know, kind of waking us up, as it were. But
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Jeff. I really, really, really appreciate it.
Yep. Happy to. Always happy to be here. Absolutely.
Thank you.